War has never just been fought with rifles and artillery. Behind the clash of armies and the roar of machines lies a quieter, more dangerous battlefield: espionage. Here, survival often depended not on firepower, but on invisibility. Men and women risked everything to slip unnoticed behind enemy lines, often relying on nothing more than the clothes on their backs and the stories they could convincingly tell. Disguises became a weapon, one that demanded nerve, creativity, and absolute composure. For spies, saboteurs, and resistance fighters, a clever disguise was the difference between carrying out a mission and facing a firing squad. In this guide, we uncover 9 ingenious disguises used in the most perilous moments of history, showing how ordinary appearances became extraordinary shields in the shadow world of war. The simplest and most effective disguise throughout history has been that of the ordinary civilian. Soldiers and agents attempting to cross enemy territory often abandoned their uniforms for local clothing that blended seamlessly into the crowd. During the Second World War, Allied agents parachuting into occupied France or the Low Countries would immediately shed their uniforms for peasant attire, sometimes pre-supplied, sometimes scavenged. A well-worn cap, patched trousers and mud-stained boots did more to ensure survival than any weapon could, yet this disguise came with risks. Civilians caught carrying forged papers or speaking with the wrong accent were marked for execution. To survive, operatives needed to embody the role completely, from the way they walked to the way they lit a cigarette. Religion often provided cover where no other disguise could. During conflicts in Europe, clergy members enjoyed a degree of immunity, moving across borders and through checkpoints with less suspicion. Resistance fighters exploited this, dressing operatives in cassocks or clerical collars. Priests carrying satchels of holy texts could actually be smuggling intelligence documents, radio parts, or even weapons. In occupied Poland, underground couriers sometimes disguised themselves as monks, travelling freely between villages while carrying coded messages. The strength of this disguise lay in the deep respect and trust communities still held for religious figures, even in times of brutal occupation. Few disguises could pass through heavily guarded checkpoints as easily as medical personnel. In both world wars, resistance networks used the identity of nurses and ambulance drivers to shuttle wounded fighters, weapons and intelligence under the guise of humanitarian aid. Women in particular played key roles, donning Red Cross armbands and carrying stretchers as cover for subversive work. The genius of this disguise was its plausibility. War creates an endless need for medical workers, and occupied territories constantly saw doctors and nurses moving between towns. However, discovery meant a brutal fate, as enemy forces often considered such acts the most egregious betrayal of trust. Commerce, like religion, offered another powerful cloak. Traders were expected to move across borders with goods, carts and supplies. Behind enemy lines, disguised merchants could carry contraband hidden in sacks of grain or beneath crates of fruit. During the Napoleonic Wars, smugglers doubled as informants, posing as neutral traders while gathering intelligence on troop movements. In World War II, German counterintelligence reported endless trouble with black marketeers, some of whom were genuine profiteers, while others were agents slipping messages and weapons through checkpoints disguised as commerce. The trick was blending the ordinary hardship of wartime trade with the extraordinary needs of espionage. Entertainers, musicians and circus performers offered one of the most unexpected disguises in occupied territories. Travelling troops had reason to move freely, and their performances often drew both civilian and military audiences. Resistance fighters exploited this opportunity, hiding agents within performance groups or using the chaos of travelling shows as cover for smuggling materials. During the First World War, some spies moved across enemy lines disguised as vaudeville performers, carrying instruments or costumes rather than weapons. The sheer novelty of the disguise often lowered suspicion, as soldiers rarely expected deadly information to pass through the hands of clowns or fiddlers. War creates refugees in staggering numbers, And this tragedy provided yet another means of disguise. Spies and resistance operatives could pose as displaced civilians, moving with groups of the homeless or war-torn. During the Second World War, Allied operatives disguised themselves as refugees, fleeing advancing armies, often carrying little more than a bundle of rags. The disguise allowed for movement in plain sight, but demanded a performance of weariness and despair, convincing enough to survive scrutiny. With entire populations displaced, the disguise of the refugee provided both opportunity and immense danger. Any sign of strength or purpose could betray the deception. Railways formed the arteries of war, carrying troops, supplies and weapons across vast distances. Workers on these lines were everywhere, often invisible to the soldiers who depended on them, Resistance fighters recognized the opportunity, disguising themselves as conductors, signalmen or maintenance crews. A false uniform, a forged badge and a convincing grasp of railway routines gave agents extraordinary freedom of movement. Some carried out sabotage missions, while others quietly documented troop shipments. Because soldiers depended on railway workers, their presence raised little suspicion, making this one of the most effective disguises of modern war. Perhaps the boldest disguise of all was that of the enemy officer. History is filled with daring tales of men and women slipping behind enemy lines, dressed in stolen or forged uniforms. The power of the uniform was absolute. Guards snapped to attention, doors opened, and information flowed freely. German command posts in occupied Europe were infiltrated by Allied agents wearing SS or Wehrmacht uniforms, while in earlier centuries false insignias allowed spies to mingle with enemy troops. Yet this disguise carried the greatest risk. If discovered, the punishment was immediate execution. It required not only the uniform but the bearing, language and confidence of a true officer. For those bold enough to pull it off, it was perhaps the most ingenious disguise of all. The most subtle disguise, and perhaps the most dangerous, was no disguise at all. Double agents lived ordinary lives in occupied cities, blending into the rhythms of daily life while secretly feeding intelligence to the other side. Their disguise was their very normalcy. They were bakers, shopkeepers or office clerks, unnoticed by soldiers who never suspected betrayal beneath such humble appearances. The ingenuity here lay not in costumes or uniforms, but in perfect invisibility. The enemy searched for spies in strange clothing or odd behaviours, rarely suspecting the man who sold them bread was passing coded reports to the resistance. Disguises in war were never about costumes alone. They were about performance, psychology, and absolute control under pressure. Whether donning a cassock, a nurse's cap, or the patched trousers of a farmer, the men and women who ventured behind enemy lines understood that survival depended on total immersion in the role. One slip of language, one nervous glance, one ill-placed detail could unravel everything. These disguises remind us that war is not only a matter of weapons, but of wits. For history enthusiasts and survivalists, they offer lessons in adaptability, quick thinking, and the art of blending in. The ingenuity of disguise behind enemy lines reveals a side of history often overlooked. It wasn't only armies and generals who shaped outcomes, but ordinary individuals who risked everything in the shadows. Their disguises were shields, tools, and sometimes weapons, crafted not from steel, but from cloth and courage. For those of us who study history, these stories remind us that survival often rests not on strength but on cunning. If you found this exploration valuable and want more deep dives into the hidden tactics of history and survival, subscribe to Backyard Wisdom and share this with fellow enthusiasts. Together, we keep alive the knowledge of those who fought in the shadows, reminding us that history is as much about invisible battles as the ones we see on the battlefield.